and welcome to the latest Science and Sport podcast. I'm your host, Matt Solomon, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Boyle. This podcast is brought to you by Hawking Dynamics, the world leader in innovative force plate technology. Hawking Dynamics takes a user-centric approach, featuring a fully customizable cloud-based software that allows users to easily digest and analyze complex force plate data. The technology is constantly evolving, much like an app update for your iPhone. They communicate with users on a daily basis to make their system better. In addition to all of that, they also offer some of the most competitive prices for bilateral force plates on the market, and they're the only force plate company offering a completely wireless system. So, if you want to find out more, check out their easy intro to force plate section at www.hawkingdynamics.com/blog. So, without further ado, it's time to welcome Mike onto the show. So, Mike Boyle, welcome to the Science and Sport podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I love. I've become a huge podcast fan. It's such a great way to just interact with people that you've never met in countries, in some cases that you've never been to. Although I have been to the UK, so.
I'm currently in the Netherlands, so if you can tick that one off the list as well.
Oh, you're in the Netherlands. Okay, yeah. I have actually been to the Netherlands. I went to the Netherlands to the Papendal.
That's where I work.
Do you? Okay, yeah. I was there years ago. They had and I don't know if he's still there. They had a U.S. guy who was running strength and conditioning for speed skating, and I went out there for a couple of days and did some teaching. God, could have been 2005. God, it was a long time ago.
That's unfortunately before I even thought about doing a degree, but that was much before my time. But what did you think of Papendal when you were there?
Oh, I loved it. It was beautiful. It's amazing. Like I said, as Americans, I think we can be incredibly narrow. It's our nature, and to see that much space is what I thought was really interesting. You know what I mean? Like, you realize, like, think of the Netherlands, small country, and then you go out there and it's kind of this beautiful wooded area, and it just is, it's always an education.
It's certainly a very nice place to work. I can tell you that, and we can get into the wooded areas for a 10-minute walk when we've got a little bit of time between sessions. It's certainly a nice place to be. But we're not here to talk about me and the fact that I'm lucky to have a good job. We're here to discuss some unilateral training. But first things first, Mike Boyle, can you introduce yourself? Who are you and what have you been up to in life until now?
So I am 61 years old. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for 40 years, actually. I was, I jokingly talk about now, I was sort of pre-computer, and I was really pre-strength and conditioning coach when I was in college. I don't even know if this was a dream or an idea or what it was, but so I think I'm one of the real first generation people in the business. Now I own I guess what would be considered a private sports performance business, but it's become bigger than that in terms of we train adults, we train kids, we train athletes, and we're 20 minutes north of Boston. I speak, I write. I got a lot of little irons in the fire here as we go.
So if you have one word to describe yourself, are you a strength and conditioning coach? Are you a sport performance guy? What are you?
I'm a strength and conditioning coach.
Fantastic. So in terms of our discussion topics today, we've got some stuff on unilateral training, and I know you've delved into this extensively throughout your career. So can you give us a quick 30-second introduction as to what it is and why it's important?
Well, I think unilateral training is literally training on one leg. And what it really is, I think, is training in the way that we move there. I've said this a million times on a million podcasts, but rowing is really the only sport where we do something consistently bilateral with our lower body. So I've always talked about, obviously my book was about functional training. That's another long story, but I've always said that functional training is training that makes sense, and it's the application of functional anatomy to training. And we know that anatomically things are different when we're on one leg, and that's indisputable. But I think what we're also beginning to realize now is that we're stronger on one leg. We're more powerful on one leg. And I've been saying that for a really long time without a significant amount of science to support what I believe. But I think that both the science and the empiricism are really starting to support what we've been saying for, 15 years.
So in terms of what the science does then say, like what does unilateral training provide you which bilateral training doesn't?
Well, if you look at the concept of bilateral deficit, I mean, there's two things. Let's go back a step. One thing it provides you is it uses the muscles in the way you use them in sport. So if we simply think about the way kind of the hip and the pelvis and the spine work in unilateral stance, it's different than it is in bilateral stance. What your adductors do, what your quadratus lumborum does, what your glute medius does, all these things are different in unilateral stance than they are in bilateral stance. So in bilateral stance, you're training in a very, very non-specific traditional sort of way. When you get into unilateral training, the biggest thing is you look at this bilateral deficit idea and you realize, and bilateral deficit was studied years ago, and they looked at things like leg extension and hand grip dynamometry, and what they saw was that the summed total of right plus left generally exceeded the sum total of the two together in any of these studies that they did. And we're seeing that more and more now with unilateral lower body training, where people are just moving incredible amounts of weight on one leg that are really difficult to explain if you're like a bilateral believer. I feel like bilateral is sort of like old time religion. There's people who just don't want to give up this really strong feeling that they have about bilateral training, and they're willing to just deny science in order to stay grounded in something that they believe strongly in.
So when you then look at bilateral training, obviously there has to be some advantages. What advantages do you think there are in bilateral compared to unilateral?
I don't think there's many, to be honest. I would almost go so far as to say none, but I think it is good for beginners, because from a coordinated standpoint, some of the unilateral stuff is too difficult for beginners to be able to master. So I think bilateral is a really good place to start. I just think the problem with bilateral is that we begin to pursue strength for strength's sake. We become strength coaches. And, all of a sudden it's about how much someone can squat or how much somebody can deadlift. And the harsh reality of that is there's a point in time, and we can argue where that is, 2 times body weight, whatever it is, where just the pursuit of strength becomes less significant or less important anyway. And then when you get into kind of the specificities, functionality, however you want to, whatever term you want to use, as I've said I put it in very simply in my book, it is simply training that makes sense.
This podcast is also brought to you by Flex. Flex is the latest product to enter the velocity-based training market, developed by the team at Gymware. Flex is the only laser-based training system available, and it's this unique technology that makes Flex the most accurate and reliable barbell tracking product in the sub $500 category. It's wireless, portable, and it's super user-friendly. Find out why VBT is such a powerful training method and what separates Flex from the competition at flexstronger.com. And when we look at things like strength, you mentioned force outputs and that kind of stuff. Does unilateral consistently then hold up against bilateral?
I think it consistently outperforms if you really look at the data, which again, people don't want to do. The thing that we get now is that, as I said, the bilateral people are so religiously attached to their idea that they don't want to look at the other idea. They don't want to explore the other idea. They simply want to try to discredit the idea. The good thing is, and I was talking about, there's the old quote about, 3 stages of an idea. First it is ridiculed, then it's accepted, and then it's, it was my idea before. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. And I've gone from ridicule, where I was the laughing stock of the strength and conditioning world in some people's minds in 2005 when I said we're not doing bilateral stuff anymore, to now everybody's like, yeah, everybody does it. What are you talking about? It's common sense, common knowledge. And that shows you that idea has gone through the stages, right? It's become accepted to the point where people think, who doesn't believe this? But you still have, the guys, like I said, what I would call the science deniers, who are just loading people up. And when we started doing it, the funny thing is we initially did it as a kind of an injury avoidance mechanism. We just were seeing too much low back pain from, all of the heavy squatting that we were doing. And we began to pursue unilateral training from that angle. But then as we began to understand the whole bilateral deficit idea, we started to realize, I saw people, routinely handling weights on one leg that I just couldn't account for scientifically in my head. Why is this happening? Why do I have guys who can, split squat 280 pounds for reps, who can only front squat 300 pounds for reps? You know what I mean? Like, we were just seeing things that weren't adding up in our conventionally trained mind. But the more that we explored it, the more we realized that I always say, if you think about the body is made to be unilateral. It's made to be diagonal. It's designed really, really well to do that. Jump off your left hand, or jump off your left leg, use your right hand. Jump off your right leg, use your left hand. Like, you're beautifully designed diagonally. And there's some people in the bilateral deficit research that said your body will intentionally not get strong when you're doing bilateral work because the body finds it neurologically confusing. You're providing really high level inputs that the body kind of looks at and says, well, wait a second, this doesn't, why are they doing this? Doesn't even make sense. So I think there's really a lot of science, and there'll be more and more science to come. And eventually, I joke about this, but eventually people will look at me and be like, wow, Mike Boyle was right. I used to think he was such, I have a group of guys now, I used to think Mike Boyle was a pussy club. And, they're all the young guys who used to make fun of me when I first had this idea, who've now come over to my side of the fence. And a lot of them, it's really funny because I've done podcasts with a bunch of these guys and they all apologize. They're like, oh my God, the things I said about you in 2005 and, and now I've gone through the process myself and realized that most of them went through the process themselves personally, physically, and, dealt with, back pain and hip issues and all these things. And then realized, oh, I think I kind of see what Mike was getting at. From an injury prevention standpoint. And then when they start to explore it with their athletes, they're like, holy shit, excuse my language, but I can't believe the amount of weight, and we've had this, one of my former, interns, this guy named Devin McConnell, who's now director of performance for the, Arizona Coyotes in the NHL. But I mean, he had his college guys, like they were doing, hand assisted, so kind of Hatfield style split squats. But he had guys doing 500 pounds. Like, I mean, I said, like, I have videos of guys that looked like, breaking a stick, like, boop, guys down and up. I mean, literally effortless with 500 pounds. And there were years in the past when I thought if we had guys that could do that same, Hatfield squat with, 2 hands and 2 feet and could do 500 pounds like that, I would have been happy. So it's, the evidence continues to mount. And, and the good thing for me, I don't care. Like, I could care less if people don't believe me. I'm not, am I out to change the world? Yes. But do I care if there are people who don't? No. If people want to stick to the way they're doing it, I always feel like from a performance and athletic standpoint, it's better for the people that train with us if other people don't embrace a better idea. So I can comfortably kind of sit with that. And
interestingly, off the back of that, right? You mentioned some lower body exercises. What would you then go for upper body? Because it seems, intuitively that you go for a bench or a bench row variation as a bilateral upper body exercise. What kind of things are you looking for in upper body?
It's interesting because it doesn't seem to apply as much to upper body, and we've kind of bandied around the idea. Why aren't we seeing this with upper body and we're not? One of the reasons may be that we've spent so much time on, chin-ups and bench press and things like that it will take a long time to get people comfortable enough to be able to handle it. But it's, we don't tend to do as much, say, one dumbbell bench press, although we do it. And part of the reason too, I think there's a really big kind of balance component to trying to get somebody to be able to get on a bench with one really heavy dumbbell that might actually equal half of their bench press capability and be able to actually handle that in that position. And I don't know, the limiting factors may not really be the pressing musculature as much as it is kind of the ability to stay on the bench or, your ability to stabilize with your core. I don't know, but we haven't seen it as readily in upper body.
I think it's certainly interesting. And potentially, maybe you need to pull at the same time as push to get some kind of stability. Maybe you need to have some kind of hand assisted position, but that's an absolute pain in the ass to make. So it's certainly interesting to see that the lower body then has some kind of different structure and function compared to the upper body, at least in the populations that we've seen so far.
Yeah, well, I think if we wanted to get sort of, whatever scientific developmental about it, I think we've been doing bilateral power things with our lower body for a really long time, in terms of, kind of jumping skills types things. But I don't think we've been doing the upper body types of strength development things that we do now, or even upper body, power, strength in a pure unilateral nature. Like, it's not like, everybody ran, but everybody didn't throw the shot put, I guess would be my example. Everybody ran, but everybody didn't throw the javelin. And so I think there may be developmentally a difference in terms of how geared neuromuscularly the body is for lower body things versus upper body things. That's just me thinking out loud, though.
No, I think it's super interesting. It's definitely it's great to hear your thoughts on it. So when you come to then planning a periodization or a training plan, for example, how do you then get the best out of your unilateral training? How do you then go about your planning?
Well, this is great. So have you been exposed to Alex Natera's stuff? I've been kind of tweeting and Instagramming about Alex for the last 6 months to a year. And the thing that Alex did that was really interesting, and this is, I don't know if you have read Range by David Epstein, but
we have read him on the podcast, by the way. That's a great link. As if we planned that. That's brilliant. So check out the podcast with David Epstein. No, carry on. Sorry.
Shameless plug. Way to go. But you got to get Alex Natera on too, because Epstein talks about this idea of undiscovered connections in his book. That was one of the things about the book that I really liked. And in the idea of undiscovered connections, Alex Natera was trying to figure out these kind of bilateral, unilateral comparisons. And one of the things that he did was trying to figure out segmental weights of the body. And he ended up with a 1955 study of pilots where they were looking at what percentage of your body was in the seat of the plane. And basically the conclusion was that 68% of your body weight was in the seat. So Alex went out and said, okay, when we get to unilateral training, because people were always arguing about how much weight do you actually have? How much does your other leg contribute? Blah, 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 blah. Suddenly Alex said, okay, they got this pilot study. 68% of the body weight is your torso, your arms. Meaning, logically, 32% is your lower body, your legs. Meaning when you stand on one leg, you're basically minus 16%. So you end up in a situation where you've got 84% of your body when you do a one-leg squat. And Alex went on to then kind of prove that he does a great, it's an example that's much better in terms of European, but he gives the example of a 100-kilo guy squatting 100 kilos. And, he says, 100-kilo guy is squatting 100 kilos, and basically, he's got a total weight of 200 kilos. If we wanted to get a total weight, 200 kilos would be 100 kilos per leg, right? If we said that, 100 kilo body weight, 100 kilo on the bar, that would basically mean 100 kilos on each leg. If that guy stands on one leg, he has 84 kilos. And so his thing was that a guy who can handle 50% of his body weight in a one-legged squat, or, we've expanded that to what we call skater squats, some other ideas, but 50% of your body weight then equals a double body weight squat, because it equals that 200 kilo squat. And I think he said 100% of your body weight ends up giving you a triple body weight squat. So the reason I say this is when we start periodizing now, what we're trying to do is we're chasing those numbers. So we want guys to be pushing to get 50% of their body weight in these pure unilateral exercises. He also went on, he did a really good presentation for us in the shameless plug category for our winter seminar, and it's now on our MBSC TV site, or it will be at some point soon, on this whole idea. And he went into the idea of, okay, how much, I think he said, split squat, you get about 68% of the weight versus 100% of the weight, because of the back leg, and the rear foot elevated split squat, I think it goes to 84% of the weight again. And I can't give you all the math, but I can give you the pure unilateral math and let you know that our idea is to get to 50% of body weight. So if we want a guy if we got a guy who weighs, in our world, 200 pounds, which is, relatively close to your 200 kilo guy, but it gives you the simple math. We want that guy to be, when he can do a one leg squat with 100 pounds, he's real strong. He's double body weight strong. So that's what we're chasing. And then we chase it the same way. We chase it through our periodization in terms of phase one is kind of a higher rep anatomical adaptation sort of phase. Phase two is a lower rep strength type phase. Then we move into, we might do some isometric emphasis or some eccentric emphasis or some complex type training, but we pursue these unilateral lifts, basically things like slide board lunge, skater squat, one leg squat, rear foot elevated split squat, one leg straight leg deadlift. We pursue them like they were the back squat. We pursue them for numbers. And I think that's where a lot of people fail, and that they view them as, they're accessories, they're assistants, whatever. Just kind of do whatever when you do it. Is that too much?
No, that's absolutely perfect. What do you then mean by pure unilateral? Do you mean no support from the back leg, for example, no support from the hands?
Pure unilateral would be a pure unilateral, a one leg squat, where you're standing strictly on that leg. And we have a bunch of different versions of that, but that would be the basic idea. Whereas things like split squat, rear foot elevated split squat, and even step up would not be considered pure unilateral, because you would have some sort of assistance from the other leg. And that's, like I said, Alex in his presentation goes into really how much assistance. Like one of the things he said is that step ups are a good beginner exercise because it's almost 50-50 the way that it works out, because your bottom leg can't help but help you trying to push yourself up through. So, it's sort of like you would go, if you're thinking difficulty, you might go step up, split squat, rear foot elevated split squat, one leg squat, in terms of being able to move through. And we will do that with more of a beginner or an adult, someone who just can't pop up and do a one leg squat. But with our higher level athletes, we'll start right with an unsupported one leg squat, and we'll try to relatively quickly introduce loading into that. We're using chains now for loading just because of COVID. We had to kind of ditch our weight vests because they were, they absorbed a lot of sweat, and our chains don't absorb sweat. So, we're kind of combining chains and dumbbells and different things to get the loading that we're looking for.
I think it's super interesting. It's great to hear how you apply things as well and move through different phases. But in terms of time, we're pushed. So I want to ask you the most difficult question that we can find, and that is, what is the one thing that you see or do differently which the rest of the world can learn from?
I thought about this. You asked. Luckily for you, you cheat and send the questions in advance. But you know what the one thing I do differently? I keep learning. I don't get to a place and decide, and put my flag in the ground and say, okay, I'm here. And that's why we're doing unilateral training. That's why we're doing the speed training that we're doing, because at 61, I haven't given up on learning. I have not sort of deemed myself to be all knowing. And I think there's a lot of people in our profession who they reach a certain point and then they're like, I'm done. I have a philosophy. I have what I believe in, and I'm not changing shit, and I think that's what we've done, the people that I've surrounded myself with, really differently collectively.
And how, just off the back of that, how do you then find the time to do all of the things that you do, which is a lot if we move back to the start of the show? How do you find the time to do all of that and then still get all of the learning that you want to get done too? Well,
one, you get up early. Two, you use your commuting time. So, for instance, I was listening to your podcast with Jake on my way into work, and I think you have to be a good time manager. And then 3, you surround yourself with really good people so you can do, I do less and less of the day-to-day nuts and bolts work. I coach when I want, and I coach the people that I want, and I coach kind of at the times that I want to coach. And I can spend, the rest of the, I can spend the rest of the time learning. Just, I was up at 5 o'clock this morning, and I'll sit from 5 until 8 sometimes, just playing around my computer, reading stuff, looking at things, thinking about things, looking at Twitter, whatever, and trying to stimulate my brain.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic life lesson. So, Mike, massive thanks for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you reaching out so that we can do this.
The pleasure is, of course, all mine, but thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks to Mike for all of his hard work on today's podcast. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure you do at home too. Before you leave, I want to point you in the direction of our 7-day free trial of the Coach Academy. Now, the Coach Academy is a series of mini lectures broken down for you into bite-sized chunks. And those lectures span a range of different topics. Of particular interest in today's podcast could be, for example, strength training and periodization. So, all you have to do to check out the Coach Academy and get your 7 days for free is click the link in the show notes, and you can get hold of those lectures broken down into bite-sized chunks, which you can fit around your busy coaching schedule in just a few seconds' time. And also, before you leave, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and that means that you won't miss out on next week's fantastic guest. So that's it. Once again, a massive thanks from me. I'm Matt Solomon for Science of Sport, and I'll speak to you next week.